going to go ahead and start, and what I'd like to do is have the panel members introduce themselves, let us know what agency you are from, if you would, and just a quick bit of information about what you do with human trafficking, what is kind of your role in it.
Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Cook. I'm a Deputy Commonwealth Attorney in Chesterfield County. My responsibility as it relates to human trafficking is to prosecute cases involving adult victims of human trafficking.
All right.
I'm Laura Kay with Chesterfield County Police Special Victims. My role is not only investigating cases of human trafficking, but also I train all the police recruits on human trafficking, and we are currently putting together a presentation for all police officers in their in-service training for human trafficking.
Hi, I'm Erin. Is it on? Hi, I'm Erin Barr. I'm a Deputy Commonwealth Attorney in Chesterfield that oversees the Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court. So I work with Barbara. I do trafficking cases that would involve a juvenile victim.
My name is Mike Fondo. I'm a Deputy Commonwealth Attorney in Henrico County, and I have a similar job to Barbara and Erin in Henrico.
I'm Detective Willie Dunn with Henrico Police, and myself, along with my 3 other partners, are responsible for all the human trafficking related investigations in Henrico County.
Could y'all hear me when I said that?
Yes.
Did you repeat it or you couldn't hear it?
No, we're good. We heard you.
That's the right one.
Detective.
My name's Rusty Hale. I'm a lieutenant with the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office. I supervise the Vice Narcotics Unit, and with that, we investigate human trafficking cases in Hamilton.
All right.
Hi, I'm Sarah Jennings. I'm the manager for Bond Support Richmond Forensic Nursing Services, and our forensic nurses provide care to victims who have experienced some type of trafficking.
I'm Elizabeth Medley. I'm with the AG's office. I co-lead the Hampton Roads Human Trafficking Task Force with Homeland Security, and I just direct people where they need to go when they call our office.
Oh, it's working now. My name is Joelle Dennison. I work with local nonprofit Richmond Justice Initiative, RJI. We've been around for 10 years, and the way that we fight human trafficking is through prevention and education, with our biggest program being Prevention Project that goes into middle schools, high schools, after-school programs, and youth groups.
My name is Chip Lavender. I'm a special agent with the FBI. I'm assigned to the Richmond field office, and one of my responsibilities is human trafficking.
You all asked some really good questions on the, you all asked some really good questions on your cards. I was just going through them real quickly. Sometimes I'll put in some questions of my own to get things started, but I think I'm going to start with what you guys want to hear about. So, I'm just going to throw these out there. You guys have done this with me before. Sometimes I'll call on you specifically and put you in the hot seat to answer, and other times whoever would like to speak to it. First thing I would like to say to you all, though, in the audience is the people that you see, it takes this large of a team to work human trafficking cases. They are very complex, and it's no one person that you see sitting on this stage. When we have a victim of human trafficking, it might be all of us trying to make an impact. So I think it's important for you to think, you might be thinking, well, why are they all up there? It takes all these people to do things to help. All right, so let's start off. It says here, are all police trained to notice human trafficking? One of our law enforcement people want to take that one?
I can speak on behalf of Chesterfield. You don't hear me okay?
No.
No.
You don't hear me?
You have to, if you put it up real close, I've learned.
Great.
You have it like you're singing.
Yeah, that I'm not funny. As I said before, we do teach all of our police recruits do receive that training in the police academy. We recognize a need our department has, so like I said before, we are currently working on a presentation that every single sworn police officer will get in their in-service training this year for human trafficking and what to look for.
How about the other agencies? We've got FBI, we've got Henrico. We also have Hanover and Goochland in the audience.
Well, for Henrico, we teach an 8-hour block to all the new recruits, and we have on 2 occasions in the past 4 years taught in service to our existing officers for human trafficking, signs of human trafficking.
As far as our jurisdiction, this is all new to us. We're trying to catch up. So we are beginning to train every sworn officer in our agency. So we're trying to get better with that.
I want to continue on that for just a second. So as a forensic nurse, part of what interests me is what's happening in the healthcare world, because 1 in 4 victims will actually seek medical care with a healthcare provider while they are being trafficked, and we don't recognize it. And so to that extent, Sarah, is there any training for healthcare providers since we know they come across our doors?
Sure. So all of Bon Secours, Richmond, and Hampton Roads have received specialized training on how to identify victims of trafficking. So that really is initial signs, which a lot of what Melissa covered in her presentation, not knowing where they are, identifying by a different age, or having no documentation with them when they come to the hospital. But really for the healthcare provider to know what questions to ask these patients to see if they are being trafficked is something that we do train all of our frontline staff. We train every person in the entire hospital, so from environmental services to our dietary folks to our administration. Everyone has received the exact same training, so it is something that we are learning. From the EMS perspective in Virginia, all EMS providers also have to be trained to identify signs of trafficking, so it is across the healthcare spectrum.
So we frequently receive this question, and I think I'd like for you all to touch on it for just a moment. Where does human trafficking not happen in this area? I'm going to turn that question in reverse. Because I'll be honest with you all, I had a friend coming to stay in Richmond, and I wanted to know a safe hotel to have and check into. So I'd like for you all, whoever would like to take that one, is it in all of your jurisdictions? Let's start there. And if so, how do we know that it's there? What, kind of what are the hot spots? How do we know they're hot spots? I want to know what's happening here.
Well, I'll start. In Hanover County, we're certainly, we have Interstate 95 and 295 running right through our jurisdiction. So along Interstate 95 alone, we have 3 truck stops. We also have, of course, one of those truck stops is positioned right across the street from King's Dominion, which is a big tourist attraction. So we have, massage parlors, we have nail salons, we have lots of places where human trafficking is taking place. And so unlike, any other jurisdiction in Virginia, we're susceptible and we know what's going on.
Right, Chesterfield?
Very good. Ladies first.
Just to bring it close to home, on the way here, I wasn't here last year for this symposium, but I was here the initial year, the first year. And I was trying to think since the initial year, how far have we come? Because that was kind of the beginning for Chesterfield. We had stumbled into one of our first cases, detectives were starting to train, Bon Secours had just gotten the regional task force together, Carl Duffy was getting the Rotary Club on the topic as well. And I was trying to count how many actual cases we had taken to court. I think we've actually gotten 3 trafficking convictions. One case ended in assault and battery convictions, but was actually a labor trafficking case that Detective Kay and I did together. And then we have one in court currently. And when I was thinking about those, what's kind of interesting is I think half of those occurred around the Huguenot-Grobius corridor, which we're kind of near, which of course is what I would say the northwestern part of the county, also the more affluent part of our county. And then half of those occurred in the motels along Chippenham, Midlothian Turnpike, and the motels along Jeff Davis. So it certainly is everywhere. It's not as if we're just seeing it on the motels on Midlothian Turnpike or just seeing it on Jeff Davis. We're also seeing it in our neighborhoods in Midlothian. So it is everywhere.
I concur, it is everywhere. There's 83 hotels in Henrico County, and in the 7 years I've been doing this specific work, it's only one hotel we've not been to deal with a victim of human trafficking. So West End, the East End near the airport, our Central District, we have a plethora of hotels, and we've been to all of them to deal with this. So.
I bet you don't have to answer this, but I bet the audience is thinking, okay, which is the one? Okay, $1 million question. So you mentioned hotels, you mentioned nail salons and spas. Tell me what's happening at the nail salons and spas. I kind of get the hotel, but talk to us about what trafficking might look like in one of those industries.
I would say, first of all, a lot of the labor comes from overseas. So as Melissa was talking in her presentation, some folks promised a trip to the United States of America, where they see an opportunity to make money and a better life for themselves. And they get trapped once they arrive. A lot of times, they have to pay back the expenses to their trafficker, and they get roped into working in an industry that they didn't necessarily think they were going to be working in. But we, a lot of these individuals, it's tough to build a rapport with law enforcement because of the language barrier. So they come to America, they don't speak English. There are big cultural differences, and it creates challenges for law enforcement officers and also everyone that you see up here as far as helping them and helping them escape the life that they're in.
Mike, I'd like for you to take this one if you would. And the reason I'm asking you is because out of all of us, you've probably been doing this the longest and have seen the most victims. I want to know what that victim looks like.
So that's a loaded question, but let me start by saying this. One of the things that I've learned over the past 7 years since we started doing these cases is that we have in our society an epidemic of sexual assault on our children and trauma on our children. And it's something, when I first started, and Aaron can speak to this probably better than I can, when I first started as a prosecutor back in 2001, I started in juvenile court, and I was amazed at the family dynamic that there appeared to be mom, dad, kids, and then some random guy that moved into the house at some point that appears to be there for the purpose of having sex with the children. And I couldn't figure out how that person had been allowed to move into the house and do the things that he did to children. And so now, some 15 to 20 years later, I see the other side of that coin, and I see that we really neglected these young people at the most vulnerable phase in their life. And one of the things that we've learned, and I'm no psychologist, but I've sort of learned this from trial and error, is that when young people are the victims of sexual assault at their formative years, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, that there's a tendency that psychologically they are frozen at that age. We steal from them their childhood. We steal from them their teenage years, and we force them to become adults at a younger age. And these young people, and certainly not every woman or man involved in prostitution falls in this category, but a lot of them do. These young women and men are the individuals that are easily preyed upon by sex traffickers. When you think about it, and Melissa talked about it in her presentation, you've got a young person who, again, is struggling with understanding what happened to her, struggling with understanding why she was victimized, and to cope with and to regain control over her world, she knows two things. One is that she is sexually appealing and that her body attracts attention. And so we oftentimes see young ladies at 11, 12, 13, 14 years old who have had something happen to them that they shouldn't have, become promiscuous as a result of that. The second component of it is drug usage. And again, Melissa hit on this, that dealing with the trauma, dealing with the psychological stress of what happened to them is a little bit easier to cope with if you're smoking marijuana, if you're doing other drugs. So you've got a young lady who has become promiscuous as a way of regaining control over the world, and who's doing drugs. And that is a ripe target for a sex trafficker. So oftentimes we try to understand why it is that this young lady or this young man is making the decisions they're making, and you've got to go back to the root causes of what happened to them. And you know, we went through a period of time where we would sit down with human trafficking victims and get their whole story, and over and over and over again, it started with, this happened to me when I was 11, this happened to me when I was 12, and I really learned a lot about how we have failed as a society in addressing these problems.
Which leads me to one of the questions the audience asked. Chip, this one is for you, because this is, I think, an area of specialty for the FBI. Of the news reports of missing persons, how many of those do you think might be victims of trafficking? Any thoughts?
I don't know. I can't speak to that. Traditionally, my background is trafficking. We, in the FBI, we traditionally have split. We have adult trafficking and kid trafficking. We have recently merged those two. We're now under one umbrella, but I've never seen statistics on how many kids that are listed as missing actually end up in human trafficking. I know the data that I've seen has varied from runaways, how many end up in human trafficking. I've heard 1 out of 8. I've heard 1 in 4. So I'm not going to hang my hat on a particular number, but there is a significant number of kids who do go missing that will end up in a human trafficking situation.
And that leads me to Joelle there. So since we know that victims of trafficking usually start around the age of 13 or 14, that's kind of the national statistic, what are we doing to help address that or prevent it?
Right, so our Prevention Project program is a program that we created back in 2012 with the assistance of law enforcement, people who had been trafficked in their young teenage years, and educators, to create a curriculum that was reaching upstream to try to curtail the problem or mitigate it before it got down the pipeline, to reach youth in their at-risk, vulnerable years, to teach them how to recognize human trafficking situations, how to understand the lures that are being used against their age group, to learn why they're targeted, how culture propagates the issue, and to invest in them as leaders of their generation so that we're passing on the movement to the younger people and they can advocate for their peers. So this is a program that's been in schools for roughly 8 years, and we are reaching middle school students, high school students, and while it's a program that is preventative in nature, we understand full well that some students in those classrooms have unfortunately already been touched by a trafficking situation, either as victims or possibly their own family involved as traffickers. And so we approach the topic by providing counseling resources to the schools and equipping them to have conversations with students that do self-identify as victims or self-identify as you know, my family might be involved in this, what do I do? So we've seen both of those situations. So education is happening. This program is throughout many different counties in Virginia. Our biggest counties are Henrico County and Newport News City Schools, but we're also a national program. So that's what's being done on the educational side.
You know, one of the beauties of being the moderator and holding the mic is you get to ask whatever you want to ask. And so my question is, why isn't it in every school? And I see a hand up there, and hang on, I'm gonna catch it. It wasn't close?
Pretty close. I wanted to know more specifically, those resources, are they also being offered to the Hispanic community?
Great.
So that is an excellent question. Whereas our prevention project doesn't have a Spanish alternative to it, because we understand that it would not just be merely translating it to Spanish, but it would have to have an entire adjustment into Spanish culture and what makes that specific population at risk. But I believe there may be other resources that are national that offer a Spanish curriculum. That specifically hasn't been where we've had our focus, but that's a great question. I think there may be resources. I would have to look into it to know which ones offer that. But we've been laser focused right now. We had high school and then recently developed middle school. Hispanic population has been kind of like pipe dream. So that's a great question though. But to answer your question, Bonnie, because I like that question as well, we want to reach as many communities as possible, and we're ready to support that. Unfortunately, there are many communities whose leadership have closed ears, just don't want to admit that human trafficking is a problem in our society, which is why education is important and why we've invested into it, because if you don't realize that there's a problem, then you're not going to welcome efforts to talk about it. And if you're not talking about it, then you are vulnerable, because traffickers are relying on ignorance in order to prey upon the youth. So we would like to see this in every community, and we're ready, and we're having a lot of really encouraging conversations. So even though I only mentioned 2 counties, there are more than those represented, but if you know any teachers, principals, administrators, I'd love to talk to you afterwards.
Okay, call to action number 1 for you all in the audience. Talk it up. We need to get it in the schools. Whoever wrote this question, I applaud you for being so politically correct. I probably would have worded it a little more frankly. Here's the question. What is being done to raise awareness with the consumers of sex trafficking in order to hopefully lessen demand? So the Johns, right? The people are buying it. Mike, they put the mic to you. Or Willie, either one.
So we do have John stings or operations on a frequent basis to focus on the consumers of the prostitutes. I will tell you that Richmond, most of the girls and guys that run across that are being trafficked are not from here. As has been mentioned before, we're around a bunch of interstates, but mainly and spend a lot of time talking to these men and women. The main reason they come here is because the money is good. That's what they keep saying, the money's good, the money's good. So, not to be funny, but Richmond is full of a bunch of freaks, consumers, whatever you want to call them. So they flood to Richmond, and but yes, we do have John operations. We do focus on the persons coming to see the prostitutes as well. So that's being done. I know Chesterfield has been doing them as well as Hanover, because we've assisted in helping them out recently with all their operations. So it's being focused on. You probably don't hear about it as often in the news, and Richmond as well. So
I'll explain a little bit more. It is a Class 1 misdemeanor in the Commonwealth of Virginia to solicit a person for prostitution, to pay a person to perform a sexual act for prostitution, and we do in Henrico County, as well as our surrounding jurisdictions, do prosecute individuals who are arrested for solicitation of prostitution. We have created in Henrico, and it's a program that's been modeled by other jurisdictions, and in fact it's been the subject of legislation for the General Assembly on I think 2 occasions, but we've created what's referred to as a John School program. And when somebody is charged and we can successfully prove the case in court, they are sent by the court to participate in a one-day program. It's a 8-hour educational program that includes the health department, it includes victim services, includes me, it includes other people, to illuminate the customers as to what they're doing in really providing jet fuel for a criminal industry. You know, for the most part, I think we get good feedback from the people involved, and we've been very successful in our recidivism rate. It's less than 5% in people that have been through this program that get caught up again in stings. And when the couple individuals who have gotten caught again, we've really come down on them hard in the criminal justice system. So it is an approach that we engage in as a way to attack this industry from all ends. We want to go after the trafficker, but we also want to do what we can do to cut down on the demand for that industry. Without the demand, or if the demand becomes too expensive, we hope that the industry will stay away.
You touched on it, but I'll ask what the person who wrote this question specifically said. What is the typical sentencing for a trafficker? Parentheses, they should throw away the jail cell key, exclamation point. I like that one. Good. So can you talk about sentencing? I guess it depends on what they're charged with and that kind of thing, or?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question, but it's also, and I agree with that sentiment 100%. You know, you've got to take every case on its own. But I would say the vast majority of cases that I've taken through to trial, 10 years is a good starting point for active sentence, and you know, we've had some that have gone up to 20, 25 years with active sentences. You know, we in Henrico don't really want to plea bargain these cases unless it's for the purpose of keeping a young lady off the witness stand and not to traumatize her again with what she's been through. And sometimes we've had some young ladies that are so vulnerable based on what's happened to them that then we know that testifying will be a difficult process. And so we look to see if there's other things we can do, drug charges, gun charges, things like that. But I think the best answer I can give you is that when we're talking about a conviction and, you know, conviction for sex trafficking, we're usually starting around 10 years and sometimes go up even higher to 20, 25 years. I've had a couple cases involving juveniles that have gone up to that top range of sentencing.
Which leads to this question. What happens to the victims who are no longer useful to their pimps? So what happens to, let me just add on to this, so what happens to the victims?
Yeah, so I guess I'm the best person to talk about that. When we started doing these cases in 2012, we really didn't know what we were getting ourselves into. And it was really, and to give, there's a number of leaders of the Henrico Police Department here, to give them credit, there was really a decision that was made by the police department that there was a lot more to prostitution than what we all thought. And so there was a learning curve that we all went into, understanding a lot of what Melissa educated y'all on. I didn't know that, we didn't know that either. And so one of the first things that we learned, and this is the mistake that prosecutors across the country, criminal justice professionals across the country make. The mistake is in assuming that when you arrest the sex trafficker, then your victim is happy that she's been removed from this situation and is ready to enter the real world. And an analogy I use often is that our victims are as afraid of the world we live in as we are of their world. Their world of being in a hotel room, of drinking, of doing drugs, of having sex with men would seem frightening to all of us, but they feel safe there. As crazy as it sounds, they feel safe. They've got somebody who, in their mind, is providing for them. almost all the time they've developed some sort of romantic feelings for that individual, and we've removed their safety net. And so what do you got? You got somebody who's terrified, who doesn't know how to exist in the world, who, again, like I said previously, had her childhood robbed from her, and it's very unrealistic to expect, hey, go get a job working at an insurance agency, or go get a job working at a bank, because that's what the rest of us do, and pay taxes and get a car and get an apartment and everything else. So we learned very quickly that there is going to have to be a lot more work. And take the example of a 17-year-old runaway who leaves home, hooks up with a pimp, and is touring the country. Is the right reaction to return her to her home? We thought it was. I mean, we were proud of ourselves. We'd call auntie or mom or whomever and say, hey, you know, your daughter's with us in Henrico County. We're going to make arrangements to reunite you. Well, there was a lot going on in that house that caused her to run away. And that didn't get addressed. That problem didn't get addressed. So what we learned is that we didn't have witnesses for court, and we weren't doing a disservice because we were helping the victim out of the industry, but we weren't going the next step of starting recovery. So we really had to refocus and put more effort into what we're doing. And this is, like I said, this is the mistake that prosecutors have made across the country, and this is the benefit of our good working relationships with folks from Hanover and Chesterfield, that we're all working together and learning from the mistakes that we've made. So the process has to be looking at the victim and not just saying, hey, we're going to talk to you the day before court, and then we'll be ready for court, like we do if somebody gets robbed or somebody's a victim of another case. So we have worked with Safe Harbor. We have worked with House of Refuge, who are two programs in Richmond, as well as other programs. Oftentimes you're talking about a young lady that has nothing in the world, has the clothes that she has on her back, has her cell phone, and that's it. Nowhere to go live. So that's not something that prosecutors and police really can spend the time 24/7 helping people rebuild. So that's where we had to go to the community. We had to beg, we had to plead, we had to negotiate, and ultimately we've gotten organizations like I've spoken about to come forward and to play that role. And I'm happy to report we now have 3 residential programs in the Richmond area for victims of human trafficking. Safe Harbor operates 2. One is a sort of a first step, an emergency home to begin with, and then there's a transitional home to help young ladies transition into the real world, transition to a job, transition to school. And we had to do all that, and that's really unlike anything else that we in law enforcement and criminal justice system were trained and skilled to do.
Sarah and Melissa, I want to send them your way. Speaking of that, there was a question about, is there an effort to provide more safe haven homes for underage girls? So you talked about the shelter. What are the parameters for the shelter? Are there age limits? I know Safe Harbor's here, so they can answer some of that at the break, but there's male victims too. Not all shelters are free necessarily. So what do we have for resources?
So we have Safe Harbor, which takes, and I'd rather Safe Harbor talk about their own program, so I'm not saying anything inappropriate, but my understanding is that they take women 18 and over, because as for juveniles, we have Youth for Tomorrow up in Northern Virginia, which is a program that has a human trafficking program component to their overall campus, but that requires either health insurance or money to pay for it. It is the same with any inpatient facility that we have in Virginia. If we need to place a juvenile in an inpatient facility, they need either health insurance or we have to come up with funding in order to pay them to take those children and pay the daily rates that they have. We have Samaritan House, which is in Virginia Beach, that operates a shelter for human trafficking victims, and they can take men, women, and transgender victims, because they have a scattered site shelter model, so they can take on male victims as well. Transitions Family Violence Services in Hampton is also able to take on men. They have a shelter for men that they just opened up. Outside of that, we rely heavily on domestic violence programs and domestic violence shelters to take our victims when we have nowhere else to place them. They can be placed in hotels if that's what we can do. We will run to Samaritan Women up in Baltimore if they have space. And then we are anxiously awaiting the youth facility to open up in Roanoke, which we're still waiting for them to open their doors. That would be the second place we have to. And that would be for girls only. So that's really off the top of my head. If I missed anything, y'all, did I miss anything?
No, I think to be blunt, what Melissa said is there are not any programs in the Commonwealth of Virginia for young people with no resources. And
Right, right.
That's the answer.
I agree
And
with you
it's
on
frustrating, and that's what we bang our heads against the wall about all the time. And I can be a little more blunt than you.
I appreciate that.
So I heard someone in the audience saying, so what do you do with them? So what happens at 2 o'clock in the morning and you have a 14-year-old, 15-year-old runaway and you think she's a victim of trafficking? And I know the answer, and it's a tough one, but I want you guys to know that we don't have a clear answer.
Right. So, yeah, unfortunately, the first answer is that we have a detention home in Henrico County, and it's a safe place. And she or he will get 3 squares, and we'll get a bed, and we'll get people that care for her. And that's always our first response, because we don't have anywhere else. And you know, we have many times that this man has sat on the phone with relatives from out of state, from family members, with social services, with other people, begging, trying to find some option, and been told no repeatedly. So the short answer is that sometimes we have to use, not sometimes, most of the time we have to use the detention home as the first response. The good news is that we have some amazing people that we work with that don't want and are not happy when a young person is placed in detention who is a victim of a crime, and we start working quickly trying to find somewhere, you know, be it out of state, be it somewhere else. One of the weirdest cases that we had involved a young lady from Georgia, and we were able somehow or another to convince Georgia to pay for the placement for her to stay. And she actually is one of our great success stories and one of the individuals that really has moved me as a human being. And it was just awesome that we were able to get Georgia Social Services to pick up the tab for her for several years to live in a residential program. But there isn't a great answer to that question, and detention home is certainly not what our choice is, but sometimes it's the only choice that we have.
So call to action 2 for you all. How come I don't hear more about this on the news of people in our community not really mad about this?